Hello and welcome to another episode of Stand Up with Pete Dominic presents Can You Talk Real Quick? Which is my version of a mini-pod, a quick conversation, a quick call that I have with an important, thoughtful expert about a relevant or ongoing issue or situation. Today, I welcome award-winning, highly respected, almost always predicts it right, economist, my favorite, Dean Baker of the Center for Economic Policy Research, CEPR.net, where he does the best criticism of media economic reporting that is out there anywhere, in my opinion. He also writes and contributes articles to a wide range of outlets, including CEPR.net, where he has recently written about artificial intelligence and whether or not it's going to replace all of our jobs. Doesn't necessarily think it will be. I talked with him about that, and I think that's an evergreen conversation for any time, so share this one with your friends, certainly the second half of this conversation. But the more imminent or relevant conversation is the first half of our talk, which is about the Fed and interest rates and inflation, which it was announced today would be put on hold, at least for a minute. The Federal Reserve pauses interest rates after 15 months of hikes. Federal Reserve pauses interest rate hikes for June as central bank evaluates economy. And finally, a third headline from the New York Times, Fed leaves rates unchanged for now. So we talked about both of those issues, AI, replacing jobs, and interest rates and inflation. As always, I try to keep up with Dean Baker in this conversation. And you can keep up with Dean everywhere on Twitter at DeanBaker13. And like I said, CEPR.net, DeanBaker.net is his website. Go get all of his books. A quick and really important conversation with my favorite economist right now. All right, there he is, my favorite economist. I say he should be yours. I've been following him for a long time, and his track record is amazing, and certainly better, I think we can say, than Larry Summers. Dean Baker, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
I mean, let's start there. I mean, what did Larry Summers, the esteemed former Treasury Secretary, the guy that the mainstream media loves to go to, the guy that when you want to interview him in Aspen Ideas Fest, he said, as long as you'll interview my wife about her poetry, but I digress. He said what about inflation 15 months ago or whenever?
Well, Larry Summers was treated as being this brilliant foresight, that he had predicted that we'd have high inflation. And the big part, and, I've had back and forth with a lot of people on this Twitter and elsewhere, the big part was he said that we would have to have a prolonged period of high unemployment to get it down. And by prolonged period, he's talking about 6% unemployment for several years, or I think he once said 10% unemployment for 1 year. I mean, I know the models he's using, I won't go into detail, but the long and short is we're going to have a lot of people really suffer a lot to get the inflation rate down. And what we've seen is the inflation rates come down a lot, maybe not to the Fed's 2% target, but we're most of the way there. And the unemployment right now is 3.7%. It was 3.4, which is, of course, better, but 3.7 by any measure is a very, very low unemployment rate. So that looks like Larry Summers was wrong. I'm very happy about it, not because I want to say Larry Summers is wrong. I don't mind saying that, but I'm very happy about it because I don't want to see a lot of people lose their jobs.
Right. You're I always feel, as long as I've been reading you and following you're anti-suffering.
I think it's best if we could avoid it.
Well, it was 15 months ago that the Fed, I guess, started their historic campaign to, quote, cool inflation. What were your predictions? What were your suggestions? And what has surprised you? And now here we are today, and they're taking a break, at least for the moment.
Yeah, well, I couldn't quarrel with their decision to raise rates, and I'd probably agree that they should have raised them sooner. And I was really struck that as soon as they raised them, the housing market instantly turned. So there are a number of measures. They're somewhat ad hoc. I mean, you have private companies. There's not a government statistic on it, but there's a number of private companies, realtor companies, that report the number of bids on a house before it's sold. And they were getting, prior to the rate hike, 3, 4, 5 bids on every house that came up, and usually above the listing price. Changed immediately, which to my view said, oh, yeah, you definitely have a bubble there. Nothing like what we had in 05, 06. But you had this sort of irrational exuberance, to steal Alan Greenspan's phrase, a good phrase. You had that there pushing up prices. They raised rates. That just stopped. And that was a good thing because prices were getting out of line. That's not a good story. And so that was good. What really worried me was that the rapid rate hikes that they went with were going to lead to a sharp slowing of the economy and a big increase in unemployment. And I've been surprised that, unemployment continued to fall. Again, we had the jump last month from 3.4 to 3.7. If you parse things, it was like from 3.4 to 3.65, but whatever. That's not good news. I'm hoping that's, not the first in an upward trend, but that was just a one-time jump and we level off. Maybe we'll even come down a little bit, whatever. But the strength of the labor market in the face of those rate hikes has surprised me. I was really worried that the Fed was going too far, too fast. And we may still find out that they did, because rate hikes have a lagged effect. So we might find that we're having this discussion 3 or 6 months from now that unemployment's higher, the economy looks worse. I'm not betting on that, but I'm just saying you can't rule that out.
What are one or two specifics that you look at in this case with where we're at now that the Fed is looking at to put a pause on raising rates, although apparently they still might raise rates at least a couple times more before the year ends? But what are what statistics are you looking at here that they factored in?
Well, there's several things. One, and the Fed said this, and, the wage growth is obviously a really big story. And there has been a lot of confusion on it. Wage growth was not the driver in inflation. And that's very clear. The wage share actually fell in 2021 and into 2022. So wages were not driving inflation. It was profits driving inflation. But there's a true statement that you could make here that if you have, let's say, a 6% rate of wage growth, which we did at the start of 2022, even a little bit more rapid than that, you're going to have high inflation, because you can't sustain 6% wage growth and expect that inflation is going to be anywhere near 2%. I don't worship 2%, but the point is, if you have 6% wage growth, well, you're probably going to have inflation 4.5, something like that. Is that acceptable? It doesn't get me terribly upset, but in any case, that's a relatively high rate of inflation, at least compared to where we had been. So they look at wage growth. Wage growth has come down from over 6% to, give or take, a little bit of 4%, depending which month, which series we use, but roughly 4%, which is almost the same as what we had in 2018, 2019, when inflation was consistent with the Fed's target. So that's one thing. Other things, just looking at a range of prices, I kept talking about how we have supply chain problems. I mean, not that I alone was talking about, everyone was talking about that. But the point is that was the biggest factor in inflation. We had used car prices go up like 55%.
Supply chain issues as a result of the pandemic, mainly?
Exactly. Yeah. So, the backlogs at the ports, factories haven't been shut down here and around the world, so people couldn't get parts. You couldn't produce a lot of things. So that led to big rises in price on a lot of goods. Some of those have come down, but that's not over. So again, I'm looking for further declines in used car prices, new car prices, a range of other things, household products, things like furnishings, appliances, apparel. Those will come down more. We're seeing a lot of evidence for that. So if you look at import prices, those have been way below the domestic prices. And you can't tell a story that you're going to have import prices, say, falling for apparel, flat or falling, but the domestic prices rise 3% a year. I mean, we have enough experience. We could look at that. You don't see it. So those are things I look to. And the last thing I'll just mention is housing. We have these private indexes of marketed units. So when I'm saying a marketed unit, this is, I moved this year, so my place is up for rent. That thing. So it's on the market. Most people, of course, don't move most years. So most units aren't marketed, but we have roughly 15, 18% are marketed. So we have these private indexes of marketed units that show much lower rental inflation than what we saw in the CPI. So in the consumer price index, we're seeing rental inflation. It got as high as 8 or 9%. It's since fallen, but we know it's going to fall further because these indexes of market units lead the consumer price index measure of rent. So that's going to go where it is today. It's about 0.5% a month, 6% annualized. That's going to fall to 2%, 1%, might even go negative. And that's a really big chunk of the index. It's 40% of the core consumer price index that many of us focus on. So that's a really big deal. So I'm looking at those things and go, okay, the Fed's targeting 2%. Are we going to be at 2%? We might be somewhat higher, but we're going to be close to that. And to my view, it'd be absolutely nuts to have a lot of people be thrown out of work to say, get the inflation rate down from 2.5% or even 3% to 2%.
Right. Just when factoring all of that, I was just reading, I think it was your writing, obviously, about the analysis being done on inflation. They remove the cost of energy or something like that? I mean, when you look at, I think we're generally talking about the price of a barrel of oil, and that is so often that's decided by the kind of supply and demand that OPEC, whatever they want, I suppose. And obviously, we just heard about them; they're going to screw us over the summer, apparently. And I wonder isn't that underlying everything? The cost of a gallon of gas, a barrel of oil.
Well, that's obviously something that's very visible, and it does obviously affect people's living standards. So when we had gas over $5 a gallon last summer, that was a big deal. I mean, both it was actually money out of people's pockets, but also, everyone sees that. As people kept reminding me, you go down the highway, you see the price of gas. So that's a big deal. That's come down $3.50. I couldn't tell you the latest price. So, I mean, somewhere around there. Obviously, we're all paying a little bit different parts of the country. But it's very much in keeping with where we were before the pandemic. So that's a good story. Is that going to go higher or lower? Saudi Arabia, of course, the world's biggest producer, I guess after us, we're the biggest producer now. But in any case, they're talking about cutting back production more. I'm not sure how much impact that will have. I don't think they can cut it back that much more. And you have a lot of other producers that can easily make up that gap. So I don't see oil prices going up in a big way, which doesn't mean they can't go up $5 or $10 a barrel. That will translate into, 20, 25 cents a gallon at the pump. They could go up that much. But in terms of going back up to 100, 120, where we were last summer, I'll be very surprised if that happens. We're
talking on Flag Day, and AAA says the national average is $3.591 a gallon for gasoline. So exactly what you said, by the way. All right. Well, a lot of really important and interesting things to talk about with inflation. I think the final question here is simply the political one, maybe. It's really an economic question, but obviously people are going to want to make it political. Did the Inflation Reduction Act contribute to where we are at with this lowering of inflation in the United States of America, Dean?
I don't think it contributes to lowering inflation. I think it was a misnomer. Biden had to, Manchin was saying that, I'm concerned about inflation. So I think to get Manchin's vote, he says, okay, it's an Inflation Reduction Act. They did raise some taxes. They'll have an impact on inflation. They're controlling drug prices. We'll see how that pans out because that's not until the future. But I'll tell you what it did do is we've seen a massive burst of construction related to clean energy, both electric cars, wind, solar. It really has exploded since that act was passed. Yeah. And I think it had way more impact than just about anyone would have imagined. I mean, to my view, that's fantastic, but it really, it's had a very big impact that way. In the long term, that will lower inflation. I mean, if we're getting clean energy, cheap wind and solar, but in terms of how much impact it's had today on inflation, probably not much.
I feel like that was the starkest proof that a belief that I've always just tried to hold is government does need to pick winners, actually. And it always picks winners in terms of who it invests, who it incentivizes, who it gives tax credits to. And in the case of energy, government needed to invest in the future of green energy, and it's clearly paying off. The point being that, private investors weren't going to build these giant billion-dollar battery plants.
Yeah. So critics say, government could pick the wrong targets, and It can. And there are many cases where it has.
Sure.
I can remember back to the late 70s when there was this big push under the Carter administration for synthetic fuels. And that turned out to be a massive boondoggle. They led to, huge investments in shale fuel oil. I mean, horrible from a greenhouse gas perspective. No one was thinking of that at the time. But, they all went bust when oil prices dropped and they cut back the subsidies and had these huge projects that all the big oil companies were into that just went bust. Just saying that, government can play an incredibly constructive role, and it has here, but it could also have boondoggles. So you have to, it's an appropriate caution. I mean, if we just assume if the government does it, it's going to work. No. Definitely
but
not.
Just when it comes to energy, I mean, there was so much made of the investment, the bust of the investment into the Solyndra company specifically. But when you looked at the history of that investment, the government invested in it because hundreds of private investors said invest in that company, and they weren't predicting that China was going to undersell on panels and take the entire bottom out of that company and the solar industry in America. Do I have that right?
Well, you have it partly right. That was part of a bigger set of projects. One of the other companies that the government invested in, you might have heard of, Tesla. So,
Well,
the government.
yeah, most of that investment was good, but they got politicized when they focused on the one company that was bad, I believe.
Exactly. And that's again, it's not a problem with the program per se. It was a problem with the political environment. I'll blame the media. I mean, if they
Sure.
jumped on the Republicans every time they said Solyndra, and they said, oh, but what about all the companies like Tesla?
Right.
I mean, the others didn't succeed like Tesla, but there were a lot of other companies that did succeed. Are you opposed to those too? And you'd look like an idiot if you made a big point of saying, oh, yeah, we never should have invested in Tesla. Let it go belly up.
All right. Well, given that, and I think there is a segue into the article I really wanted to talk with you about today, which is available for listeners, for readers at CEPR.net. And of course, I subscribe to Dean on Patreon and got it. It's titled AI, Job Loss and Productivity Growth. And you're reading about this, I bet, as much as anything else these days. And this is the main concern that people have outside of robots killing us, them replacing our jobs. Give me an overview of this piece.
Yeah, so we've seen this story before. This is with computers and robots, and now it's AI, that somehow we're going to have this new technology that just takes all the jobs, and then we're going to be sitting around there with nothing to do. And what I point out in the piece is that, look, we have a term for this. We have a way to think about it. It's called productivity growth. And basically, we've been seeing productivity growth in the economy for, well, pretty much forever, but certainly in the last 150, 200 years as we've developed a modern market economy. And generally, we think of productivity growth as a good thing, because when you have rapid productivity growth, that means we get more output for every hour of work. So we work an hour, we're 2%, 3% more productive. In principle, our pay goes up that much. No guarantee it does, but there have been long periods, and the one I and others always point to, the quarter century after World War II, when we had very rapid productivity growth, 3% a year, and wages pretty much kept pace with that. That was a period of rapidly rising living standards for broad segments of the population. So the idea that productivity growth is somehow our enemy, something to be feared, to my view, that's close to crazy.
Well, you talk, though, specifically about, in this article, I don't know if I can really frame it correctly, but how it's really important as to what government policies say and do that allows management what they can say or do. And you specifically use the example of Bill Gates and others in the tech industry who became incredibly rich because the government granted them patent copyright protection for their computer software. And you say that was a policy choice. So basically what you're saying, I feel like in this piece, is this is about policy choices in terms of whether or not this technology replaces people's jobs or, slows their wages or even prevents them from ever making them.
That's right. So in the case of, looking to Bill Gates, he became incredibly rich because, of course, Microsoft charges us, I don't know what the price is these days on our Windows operating system, which most of us have in our computers, and God knows what else they're into, 1,000 other things, of course.
Yeah.
If they didn't have patent copyright protection, then we'd get it all for free. And Bill Gates wouldn't be very rich, and we'd be paying much less for our computers, our software, and a lot of other things. And, another example that I believe I mentioned, there's Moderna.
Yeah, do Moderna. I just
think that's such a crude case. We paid $1 billion to Moderna to develop its COVID vaccine and then to test it. And then we gave them control over it. And the company has, of course, made billions and billions in profits. There were 5 Moderna billionaires as of the summer of 2021. I don't know what the number would be today. And that was entirely a government decision. We gave them the money. And then we said, it's your vaccine. We could have said, we're giving you the money, but anyone gets to produce the vaccine. We're not paying you twice. We pay you once, not twice. So if we pay you the money, anyone can produce the vaccine. It's available as a cheap generic all over the world. We could have done that. In my view, we should have done that. But in any case, that was a policy choice. We could argue whether it's wise or not, but that's policy choice. And the same will be true of AI. Obviously, the companies investing in it are betting that they'll get control of the technology, be able to make a huge amount of money. Whether that happens or not depends on the policies we pursue.
But what makes you, no way to predict what policies we're going to pursue, but I would generally think that the policies we will pursue in this case will be ones that, how do you say it, send most of the money to the people at the top of the company, much less the economy.
We should be very, very worried about that. And again, this will depend how it's regulated. how they're allowed to control it, or if they're allowed to control it, I should say. To flip it over on the positive side, I just keep thinking of some of the things. I've played around a little bit with it. I'm not going to claim any sort of expertise, but I had to do a reference section for a paper I was writing. Did it in, 5 seconds. It would have taken me, 2 hours to, piece together, maybe longer. I don't know. But, in any case, did instantly. If you could think of some of the things it could do. So, I'm not going to say the technology is necessarily there today, although I've seen some things indicating it is. You could use AI to make diagnoses. So you have a medical technician, plugs in, you go down there, they check your blood pressure, your pulse, cholesterol, all these different things, and it gives you a diagnosis. And it will likely be as good or better than a doctor. Now, think of how much money you would save if, obviously, you want a skilled technician. You want someone who knows what they're doing. So you don't want someone who they got out of high school and they're paying them the minimum wage. Someone knows what they're doing, could put it in and go, yeah, those results look right. Everything looks right there. We would save a huge amount of money on healthcare costs. Similar things with lawyers. Here, write me a brief. Here's the facts of the case. Here, write me a brief. And probably want someone to look it over, a lawyer or a paralegal, whoever, make sure everything makes sense. But we could save an enormous, that will mean large improvements in our living standards if we could have those sorts of applications of artificial intelligence and not have to pay, the Bill Gates of artificial intelligence huge amounts of money so we could do that.
But then still, it does still feel like that there will be fewer jobs in so many different places. I guess I was reading something about, we've talked about how technology replaces, blue collar workers. People are doing manual labor from picking fruit to cutting meat, whatever it might be, building cars and so on the assembly line. But now I think this article was talking about, higher paid jobs, specifically talking about computer programmers. My brother, who turned me on to Dean Baker years ago, who has tremendous respect for you, is talking to me about how there's not going to be hardly any jobs, rather, in places like computer programming, which are highly skilled, highly paid work.
Yeah, I can't tell you no one's going to be hurt by it. And that's always been the case with technology. So we had this period from, let's say 1980 till very recently, I'd say, where you saw less educated workers, people without college degrees really taking on the chin. Now, people with college degrees, particularly advanced degrees, maybe your brother, one of them, did pretty well.
No, he never went to college. He's just one of the smartest people I know.
Okay, so any case, people in positions to benefit from that technology, they did very well.
Yeah.
This is going to flip that around. Most of the research has indicated that the jobs that are most at risk tend to be the more skilled ones. So it's going to flip that around. And again, I can't tell you no one's going to get hurt. That happens. But ideally, we'll have a situation where we're going to see most people benefiting, and those who get hurt. What means is getting hurt is that instead of earning $200,000 a year, maybe they're earning $100,000 a year. They're going to be unhappy with that, but they won't be, they won't be starving. I'm picking those numbers out of the air, obviously, but but that's I think a plausible story we could tell.
Well, I appreciate your insights on this and everything else. As always, I do worry for you. Basically, these theories and ideas and analysis might mean the robots will come for you first.
Someone asked me that, and I said I'd be happy if they took my. I mean, in a certain sense, literally, I would be, in the sense that if I try to look, how can we change policy, make things better? If you had AI that could do that better than me, I'd be delighted.
Yeah, but that's part of your job as an economist. I think I've always been most fond of your criticism of the media, including recently of the New York Times, and not looking at BLS prices on food indexes as opposed to just interviewing people anecdotally in the grocery store. Like, I don't know if a robot's going to be able to do that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you could have a robot that would do that, I'd be delighted. And just to fill in listeners here, I beat up on the New York Times because they said, let's see how people view inflation. Inflation's coming down. How do people view it? And they interviewed a number of people in grocery stores in the DC metro area. And they asked them, how much does it cost you to buy, do your weekly shopping now compared to before the pandemic? And they all gave numbers that were hugely more than what the consumer price index shows for store-bought food. And, we don't all buy the exact same bundle. Some people you expect it's going to go up more, some would be less. But these were hugely more. Two of them were more than twice the increase that the consumer price index shows. So I was saying, these people might actually pay that more. They that much more. They might have bad memories. I can't remember exactly what I was paying 3 years ago. So whatever, but it would have been appropriate for the paper to point out that this is hugely more than what government data on it shows. And again, if they have some reason to question government data, fine, write that up. But, until we have a reason to question the data, it was kind of irresponsible to present these people as representative.
No robot can do that.
As I said, if they have a robot that could do that, be delighted.
Beat the press with me, Dean Baker droid. Well, if there's going to be a voice for it, I'm auditioning. Dean, always a pleasure. Thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it.
All right, thanks a lot for having me on, Pete. Good talking to you again.
Well, there you go. My conversation with Dean Baker. Turn that around real quick. You can go watch it on YouTube. YouTube.com/standup with Pete should be up there within an hour of me posting this here for you to download and listen to at your relative convenience. I cannot do any of this work without your support. So please feel free to subscribe right now. Pay as little as $5 a month. Get access to our community, our Discord platform, and so much more. And you can always edit your pledge up. And thanks to all of those who do. Until next time, be the change you want to see while also supporting me. StandUpWithPete.com.
When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your